So eventually this entire marsh is threatened and in jeopardy.
Yeah, and it's going to hurt, you know, the wildlife big time.
Hurricanes, saltwater intrusion, and the lingering effects of an oil spill, putting the Gulf Coast back together again.
Most people realize that's the value of the land, is having the wildlife. When they overshoot it or don't take care of it, it's not good.
Texas landowners work to restore habitat for an iconic bird.
When we stand in the mountains, when we go to Shenandoah Mountain, we get this sense of aha. You know, there is something greater than myself.
From the minister to the mountain biker, these Virginians aim to protect their outdoor treasures. Those stories starting now on This American Land. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Turner Foundation.
Hello and welcome to This American Land. I'm your host, Ed Arnett, and we've got some great stories for you today about the conservation of America's natural resources, our landscapes, waters, wildlife, and the people that are dedicated to conservation. In our first story today, I'll take you to the Gulf Coast along the Texas and Louisiana border, where a critical wetland ecosystem, the Chenier Plain, is being threatened by severe coastal erosion, a threat not only to marshes, plants, and animals, but also to the major industrial infrastructure in the region.
The Chenier Plain is one of the most globally significant ecoregions that we have, really in all of the Western Hemisphere.
This is one in a million. We love our coast. We love the hunting, the fishing, the family atmosphere that it brings.
This is a breach.
Over the last 75 years, this 119,000-acre Chenier Marsh has been under assault.
What are some of the major threats to this system?
Sea level rise, saltwater intrusion.
When you start cutting channels through an area, you change the internal plumbing.
Hurricane Ike did a whole lot of damage. Also, there's always that threat of another oil spill.
Our economy was hurt years ago, so we're trying to restore what we lost.
Millions of birds migrate to this area in the wintertime. It's very important we maintain what we have, and the first step is to protect our coastline.
So we're in the Houston, Port Arthur, Beaumont area of Texas. Some 50+% of the nation's oil that we produce here in the U.S., as well as our imported oil, is refined here in this particular area. It's also home to a large military base. Amidst all of this industrial complex is one of the most ecologically diverse and rich areas in North America. It's called the Chenier Plain, and it stretches from the Houston area all the way over to the southwest portion of Louisiana, some 5 million acres of wetlands and marshes.
This is one of the most important areas for wintering waterfowl and wading birds and shorebirds in all of North America. It's particularly important as a larval or nursery area for finfish and shellfish. And of course, the marshes and dunes play a critically important role in the resilience of these communities as the first line of defense against storm surges in the Gulf of Mexico.
When a storm comes ashore, the water hits this rough area, right? And that knocks the energy down.
This is John Foray, and he's a wetland ecologist with NOAA.
But when you lose the habitat, you lose that ability. And so saltwater intrusion is one of the largest factors that the Chenier Plain is facing as far as a detriment to habitat. And that the plant communities can't respond quick enough when the water changes from a fresh to a salt environment. Leads to plant death, leads to marsh breakup, and so it weakens the landscape as a whole. When you weaken the landscape, it reduces the storm surge buffer that happens.
We're very, very dependent on this area because of the fresh water. And it is a beautiful day.
This is Dow Gene Anderson, and Dow's a local resident here in the Chenier Plain and a hunting and fishing guide. Dow, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we're going to see today?
We're going to see a levee that's breached in Sabine Lake. in a 1,200-acre freshwater reservoir.
Well, let's take a boat ride and go look at it.
Let's do it. See that boat? After Ike, all that came over here from Louisiana. You can see right there is a good example. Storm after storm, high tide after high tide, it just has over time washed away. And herein lies the breach.
So how far in does the salt water actually penetrate into the fresh water?
Well, with it going back and forth, it's going to keep going.
So eventually this entire marsh is threatened and in jeopardy.
Sure. It's going to hurt, you know, the wildlife big time.
So Dal, what's it going to take to fix a breach like this of this magnitude?
You know, just the owners are not going to be able to afford to do this thing.
They're going to need some help.
Yeah, and of course, this is important to this whole area.
Over decades, the Chenier Plain has literally been nibbled to death by 1,000 paper cuts. There are a myriad of challenges that are confronting this landscape.
The best way to do it is by improving freshwater inflow.
Fortunately, we have strong leadership in the region and very experienced fisheries and wildlife biologists that know how to implement restoration and enhancement projects and initiatives to really help put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
We're building a rather large berm on McFadden that's preventing coastal waters from washing in.
What we're doing is partnering with industry to do what's called beneficial use of dredged material, where we'll take dredged material, put a layer on top of the marsh that's degrading, let it settle and revegetate so that'll support a healthy plant population again.
So we have the terrace project here that's just recently constructed, and what this will do is create a windbreak, so we can lower the internal shoreline erosion in the marsh here.
Just west of here is called the Holly Beach Breakwater Project. It's using large boulders, Volkswagen-sized boulders, offshore to protect the highway in that particular stretch of the state.
The threats to these coastal wetlands have all been well identified, and there are also a number of solutions. But implementing those solutions takes money. And it's funding that most of these small communities don't have. So many of them are seeking funds that are available after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill and the settlement from British Petroleum.
It's that once-in-a-lifetime kind of money that you never see coming from the federal government.
Over 1,200 miles of shoreline from Florida to eastern Texas were fouled and oiled by the spill. And certainly the Chenier Plain was deeply affected by this.
What you've got is an outdoorsman's paradise down here in the middle of the largest refineries and chemical plants in the world.
All of the leaders in those areas recognize undoubtedly that the health of their communities, the health of their economies are inextricably linked to the health of the ecological systems surrounding them.
If we lose this marshland, if we lose this Chenier Plain, we've now become beachfront at I-10.
For waterfowl hunting, you got to get up early in the morning.
Ed, I got you a gun, and this gun has all the misses taken out of it.
The inner duck hunter in me is emerging, and the host is regressing a little bit. I've been waterfowl hunting a long time. Stay still, don't move. Hunting is as much about a family experience and a connection to the outdoors as it is actually taking the animal and consuming the protein that you get from the land. Shoot, shoot. Oh, man, I couldn't. Good job. Oh, watch it, watch it. There, got him, finally. So if we lose this marsh, we really lose some of the tradition that's very important and the economy that comes with duck hunters coming into this area.
I'm 75 years old. I've been hunting this area right here all my life. So It's very important, not only to me, but to the whole area, because we all depend on it.
Within this 5 million acre landscape, really lives and livelihoods are dependent upon a healthy coast. And so it's critically important that we use this opportunity to invest further in it and help to rebuild and restore and enhance these natural systems, which are so critically important to the future of these communities now and to come.
Now we have another story in our series of reports on efforts underway across the country to restore habitat for the bobwhite quail, the iconic American bird that is vanishing in many areas because it's losing native grassland habitat that it needs to survive. Today we're going first to South Texas and then to Kentucky to see a vital contrast in how the management of rangeland for cattle can have a positive or destructive impact on grasslands needed by bobwhites and other wildlife.
We like to observe these birds and their odd behaviors and interacting with one another, and they were once common across much of Texas. And even though we've got strongholds in a portion of our state, we're really no different than other parts of the range where we've seen massive declines. The range is across the southeastern United States, including some 37 states. Many of those states have seen declines in excess of 90%, 95%. My name is Robert Pettis. I work for Texas Parks and Wildlife. Quail are needy. They need food in the morning. They need a resting place in the middle of the day called a loafing covert. They need some place to go to sleep at night that's suitable roosting cover on their roost. They need very specific habitat types. It seems like the more efficient we become at farming or at forestry or with cattle production, it leaves less and less habitat on the landscape for quail and other grassland birds. We greatly rely on the interaction with our land stewards, our landowners, our land managers, and we try to foster that conservation ethic. And I think we've got example after example, and here at Labradorcitas with Mr. Lawrence.
I love it. I love it when they do that. And it's really pretty to hear that. That's when they're in the mating season. That's really a neat sound. They pair off and have their babies. This is a last bastion of really great quail, and I hope it'll last for many generations. I think the landowners and most people realize that's the value of the land, is having the wildlife. When they overshoot it or don't take care of it, it's not good.
Right here, we're leaving our main compound, heading out to our North Trevino pasture. There they go. When you manage for quail, it pretty much manages for the white-tailed deer, dove, turkeys, all types of wildlife. So we have 400 steers on the ranch. In each pasture, we got about 30 to 40 head just to reduce the thick, grassy areas. Every time they take a step, they're manipulating the soil. And right where they manipulate the soil, you get some weed and forb growth, which creates seeds for quail. So cattle are a key wildlife tool if you use it correctly. If you just have thousands of head of cattle out here and they overgraze the terrain, then your quail habitat's gonna go away. Here's where we ran our disc, what we call winter plowing. And what you're doing here is you're disturbing the soil to create a natural food plot. Well, here, there's not gonna be much grass in here. And it's gonna have a canopy above so they'll feel comfortable and feed in this area and still have enough time to get away if they need to.
Most folks don't realize that the backbone of conservation for all of these species, it's hunters that pay for licenses, it's hunters that pay for stamps. In Texas, there's a $7 upland game bird stamp. And those funds go towards that resource for the biology, the research, the management, the conservation of those species.
Anytime we can get a private landowner that is interested in wildlife one way or another and is willing to conserve that habitat to keep it from being subdivided, we are seeing properties getting smaller and smaller and smaller as we go through the generations. So if we can keep those properties intact, keep that habitat intact.
I've been involved with the Caesar Clayburgh Wildlife Institute in Kingsville, Texas. We get ideas from them and they get ideas from us.
Academic research plays a critical role from my perspective because it provides the scientific basis for the conservation actions and the management that's put on the ground. Management costs a lot of money, and so we want to identify the most effective management strategies based on science. We translate that material into newsletters and other publications and magazine articles and things like that so that we reach our target audience of landowners in the area and the region.
About 30 or so years ago, primary land production was cattle, and they were working cattle ranches. But given the importance of wildlife and the economic revenues that wildlife can create, whether it's ecotourism or through hunting, landowners have really embraced that additional source of revenue, and so they started making management decisions specifically for wildlife. As with other species, the primary cause is habitat loss. As human populations increase and urbanization increases and urban sprawl, habitat is lost, and obviously less habitat means lower populations.
We're here an example of some really good quail habitat. We've got a diversity of cover types in here. We've got a good distribution of woody cover. We have forbs, we have grassy cover, there's bare ground, all of the components that a quail need. Non-native vegetation has been a real issue for bobwhite quail. As these non-native species replace the native species, we see a decline throughout the range, and not only bobwhite quail, but lots of other grassland birds. So there's a whole series of ecosystem functions that can be tied to good bobwhite quail populations, and that's why we think everybody needs to be interested in what's happening to the bobwhite quail.
Unlike the pastures in South Texas, where cattle can coexist with wildlife like quail, many of the grazing lands in the eastern United States have been transformed by the introduction of exotic grasses, destroying the original habitat and creating serious problems for quail and other wild species.
When this land was first settled centuries ago, livestock was grazing on the native grasses that occurred here and grew here naturally and did well for a long time. They started bringing in exotic grasses from other continents. Fescue was one of the premier grasses that the U.S. Department of Agriculture developed and promoted. There's multiple problems with fescue as habitat for wild birds. We are now realizing that there is opportunity to turn back the clock somewhat and replace that fescue with the native grasses that were eradicated decades ago. And the place we're standing now is one of those locations where some of the fescue has been eradicated.
Turning back the clock here in Kentucky, we see how they're doing that in our next report on the bobwhite quail. Now we head east, all the way to Virginia, to Shenandoah Mountain in the George Washington National Forest. Diverse groups of people living there are backing a plan to create protected wilderness and scenic areas that would conserve forests, critical watersheds, and recreation activities like mountain biking, hiking, and fishing.
Have you seen a wild brook trout before?
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
Isn't that awesome? Doesn't get any prettier than that. It does. The clients that I probably appreciate the most are the people that come out here and are thrilled if they catch 8 fish versus the guys that want to come out and catch 50.
Yeah.
You know, I like the people that they're just happy being here.
These headwater streams directly supply like 350,000 people in this area with their drinking water and untold millions of people all the way down through the drainages all the way to the Chesapeake Bay. My question is, do you want to know that your water is coming from a place like this? Or do you want there to be a half a dozen fracking wells up in here and that's the source of your water? Do you want to try to protect it.
A part of my job is to go out in the woods to go hiking. Another part of my job is to bring people together who don't like each other and get them to work together to try to come to common ground. The whole concept behind all of that work is moving toward an eventual wilderness bill being introduced into Congress. On a 1.1 million acre forest, there seemed to be enough for everybody. But the real pressure actually comes from the geographical area that we're in. The Shenandoah Mountain and the George Washington National Forest is within, I think, like a 5-hour drive of 10 million people. And that just puts a tremendous quantity of pressure on the resource.
The building was built in the 1800s, early 1800s, and it was a plantation. I'm Ann Reed Held, and I was the pastor of Trinity Presbyterian Church from 1990 to 2014. Well, the Presbyterian Church back in the 90s started something called Earth Care Congregations. And so the intent was to understand that in Genesis, we're all made in the image of God, and so we are to be good stewards of the earth. And when we stand in the mountains, when we go to Shenandoah Mountain, we get this sense of, aha, you know, there is something greater than myself.
We're sitting in front of the Stanton Dam on the North River, which flows off Shenandoah Mountain. And we explored the Shenandoah Mountain area, and it was just the wildest, most beautiful place I'd ever been. I'm Lynn Cameron, co-chair of Friends of Shenandoah Mountain. We realized in the 1990s that this area was becoming increasingly popular with mountain bikers. The wilderness advocates realized, uh-oh, we've got a problem here. We want to protect this area, but mountain biking, because it's mechanized transport, is not allowed in wilderness areas. And we realized we were going to either have to give up or reach out, and we decided to reach out to the mountain bikers.
Mountain biking allows you to experience the outdoors on a bunch of different levels. There can be an adrenaline rush, but some people just like actually the calmness of being outdoors.
Thomas, I'm just looking at the sign over there on the trail enhancements and really appreciating all the work that the Shenandoah Valley Bicycle Coalition has done.
Yeah, we've been really lucky to have the opportunity to bring some funding to the trails here. Saw an opportunity in HARRODSBURG where I thought the kind of landscape could use another bike shop, and a bike shop that was community-oriented and involved. I couldn't understand why someone would close a trail to a mountain bike. And then someone started kind of introducing me to other people in the outdoor community who weren't mountain bikers, who were hikers, hunters, equestrians, and really started kind of positive dialogue.
I feel really good about what we came up with. The scenic area can have roads in it, and mountain bikers can ride on all the trails. The wilderness, I'm pleased to see, because it protects the most remote core wild areas with the strongest protection.
On Buck Hill Farm, which is a family-owned farm, our cows are mostly Angus cross. A healthy farm depends on clean water and clean air, no matter what you're raising. And for us, Shenandoah Mountain is our neighbor. We farm next to it. We go there for recreation because it's 5 miles away. But what that mountain range provides in terms of filtering our water and our air and even our climate, it buffers a little bit.
I'm David Horn.
And I'm Sharon Horn, and work with Dave on the farm all the time and have a lot of fun.
I first came to this area deer hunting, but then mainly turkey hunting.
You want to go right up here on top of the ridge and just work out that way, and I'll head up this road here and we'll see what we can do.
All right, that sounds great. And when I flush any birds, I'm gonna send them this way.
All right, I'll try not to miss them.
Yeah, to keep all this protected is well worth our time.
Well, one of the most outstanding features of Shenandoah Mountain is Reddish Knob, which is the highest point. Shenandoah Mountain is actually a 72-mile-long mountain. In the last few years, we realized that the National Forest could be leased for gas development, such as fracking. National Scenic Area and Wilderness designation will permanently protect this area.
Every 10 or 15 years, the Forest Service develops a new management plan for every national forest. So during the plan revision, the Virginia Wilderness Committee and Friends of Shenandoah Mountain worked to educate local citizens who use and enjoy the George Washington National Forest about the benefits of designating additional wilderness and national scenic areas in the forest.
The human species does not have a good track record of protecting things. And this is an opportunity for us to protect something that's very special, not only to me, but to everyone in the country.
Now, here's a quick look at a story from our next show.
This place attracts climbers from all over the country because of the varied nature of the climbing here. You can do safe climbs, you can do scary climbs. One of the things I really appreciate about this area is that climbers have been taking care of this area for almost a half century now.
The challenge becomes smart growth. We want to have growth in our area, but we want to make sure that we preserve what we have.
That's our show for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
For more information about this program, visit thisamericanland.org and like us on Facebook. Funding for This American Land is provided by the Turner Foundation.